All right, welcome to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. Today, I'm talking about books. I'm going to forego my usual platform of talking about medicine. We are only talking about books today. I'm going to be talking about many different types of books, nonfiction, economics, books about feminism, books about science and racial justice and politics and immigration and history and healthcare. All right, I'm going to be going over books briefly, why I like the books, why I think you should read them. The reason I'm talking about this topic is honestly one of the reasons I even started a TikTok account was I wanted to talk about books. So if you know my TikTok account, you know I talk about books quite a bit on there. And then I started talking about medicine, and that's actually what people got interested in. But anyway, I absolutely love reading. I've always loved reading. And the reason I want to focus on books today and talk about why books and reading and specific books are so important, and many books, is that I don't know if you've noticed, but we're having an epistemological crisis right now, right? Epistemology means what is your study of knowledge, and people can no longer agree on what reality is. Usually, we have like a thriving democracy, and even the word democracy is in question, right? People can't even agree on that word democracy. That's how fractured our thinking has become. A thriving democracy, which the United States is a democracy. It's a representative democracy. It's a constitutional republic, which is a representative democracy. And to have a thriving democracy, you must have discourse, and people must have a general agree on what reality is. And we, instead of having a marketplace of ideas, we now have a marketplace of realities. And there are many, many reasons these conditions have come about. Conspiracy theorying and widespread political gaslighting. There's many reasons this has happened. And it's also not anything new in human history, right? This is just another iteration of this. So I believe reading is an antidote to this. And when I mean reading, I mean read anything. I also mean listen to audiobooks, which activate the same part of your brain. It's the same thing. Reading is the antidote to the reality crisis that we're having. And I think everybody should read. And I don't mean just nonfiction. Read fiction. Read anything. It activates a part of your brain that aids you in critical thinking just by reading anything. Reading fiction, just triggering that part of your imagination to just imagine another world. It does wonders. I mean, when I go to my bookshelf at home and I just touch a book, I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of different types of books. I just touch a book. There's a whole world there that comes to my mind. And I touch another book. There's another world. I literally have worlds, hundreds of worlds in my mind that are contained in books. That is just, it's just incredible. I have always had a love and a passion for reading. I was fortunate to grow up in a home where I looked around and people were reading books. You know, when I grew up, that was the thing that people did. And I was like, oh, so I read books from an early age, very early age. I had a passion and a love for reading, and I've always read books. And I always wanted to be a writer. When I was I remember when I was 12, I wanted to write a book about a lawyer or something because I don't know, my dad was a lawyer, and I thought that was cool. And I've just had such a passion for reading and writing, and I do write novels. I've published a couple of science fiction novels. But anyway, so I read and I listen to audiobooks. So I'm very select. I'm very careful with the books that I read, meaning I look at what other reviewers think, and I definitely am engaged in Goodreads a lot. I read lots of reviews. I write lots of reviews. And I'm always reading one book on an ebook and a hard copy, and I'm always listening to an audiobook at times two. And that way I'm able to get through books pretty quickly. I read about 75 books a year. That's generally where I come in at. But the point is not to, books aren't trophies, right? It's not like something to be like bragging about. Oh, I've read all these books. I don't. It doesn't matter if you read one book a year, whatever. It's an essential part of the human experience is to open a book. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different categories. I kind of want to just talk about classic literature that I love, a little bit of fiction, and then we're going to go into nonfiction. I'm going to go into economics books and political books. And then, as a bonus, if you care, I'm going to talk about sci-fi and fantasy at the end of this podcast. If you're not into sci-fi and fantasy, just hop off. I'll give you the warning that you can go. But if you are into science fiction and fantasy, and even if you're not and you're interested, I'll give a couple primer books that I think are really good for people to jump back into sci-fi and fantasy. Maybe you've read a little bit when you were younger, and you kind of got away from the genre. Anyway, I will tell you when that part comes. So if you're not interested in sci-fi fantasy, I'll leave that to the end and I'll let you know. So when I was in high school, I went through, the phase of just loving like classic American and English literature. Some of my favorite books that come to mind are, I loved Hemingway and Steinbeck. I still love Steinbeck to this day. Steinbeck really understood human nature extremely well. East of Eden is one of my, just all-time favorite books, and Grapes of Wrath, of course. I went through a big Kurt Vonnegut phase, Slaughterhouse-Five and Galapagos, and he's an absolute brilliant writer. I love The Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald. Everybody knows that book. Lots to talk about in that book. All Quiet on the Western Front really impacted me as a young man. Seeing the both sides of a war, that the humanizing of the enemy was just absolutely amazing. I read Crime and Punishment in high school. That just did a lot to me. One of the most profound books that I read when I was a young man, and I read it twice, was Of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham. That book for me, I related to that character so much. It's about a character, I think his name's Philip. It's been a while since I've read it. He has a clubfoot, and he goes through all these religious experiences when he's a young person. He gets, he has religious disenfranchisement, disillusionment. As he grows, he becomes to be a doctor, which, by the way, did not influence me to become a doctor. I wasn't like, I want to be this character. And then this toxic romance that he's in. Anyway, it just really covers the human experience. So if you're looking for a book like that, Of Human Bondage, it's a very it's very like white European, ethnocentric, of course, given the time that it was written and the subject matter. But it is a highly relatable book, I think, for anybody, not just if you're like a white man. I do think it's relatable for a lot of different people. I went through big science fiction when I was young. I went through Asimov and Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451, all of that. And so, I'll just kind of gloss over those. There's a lot of classic books, but what I really want to talk about today are books that are written recently and books that we can learn from about how the world works. One of my motivations for reading right now, I want to understand how the world works. And when I say the world, I'm talking about power. I want to understand how power works. So understanding how like a political party works, or why a politician is doing this or that or this or that, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's extremely hard to understand. If you're getting all of your information just from social media and mainstream news, or legacy media, sometimes it's called that, legacy media, mainstream news, right? Those are all owned. Media, the news is a consumer product. It's a consumer product, and that's the same thing as social media. It's a product that's been made to make profit from. So it's been engineered, right, for you and for your eyes and for your ears, and it's been engineered to provoke something in you, or a variety of things in a variety of people. So if you're only getting your information from news sources, and I'm talking about any news, like articles as well, right? They're all owned, and they all have an agenda. We all know this, right? I know I'm not saying anything profound here. So if you actually want to understand how power works, how power operates, then you need to read books written by many, many, many different people. And you need to read books people that don't agree with you and people that do agree with you. Okay, so I'm wasting time. Let me get into my favorite books about understanding world power. Okay, so these books are in no particular order of importance. And I'm going to go through rapid fire. I have a lot of books to talk about. The intention of this is that to give you a flavor of what the book is, and if it sounds interesting, you can go and pick it up. Okay, so the first book I'm going to talk about is The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good. This is by Michael Sandel, Sandel. It was published in 2020. So this book is all about the myth of meritocracy. If we all subscribe to a meritocracy, then we immediately valorize income and profession. If we think, a meritocracy is those that have the most merit succeed. But what you get out of this arrangement is you get social resentment. You get entire swaths of people that are left behind. They're angry and they're ready for a populist backlash because we're not a meritocracy. That's the whole point of this book. The author talks about that there's a difference between value and merit. And the writer ultimately argues for something that he calls contributive justice, not just distributive justice. Don't just distribute wealth around. What this means is, yes, we can place increase wage gap, right? Increase the wages of people that are less fortunate, but we can also bring dignity back to all work by actually allowing people to contribute back to society rather than only valuing them as like consumers. This is a fantastic read. It was one of my favorite reads of last year when I read it. So that is The Tyranny of Meritocracy. The Tyranny of Merit by Michael Sandel. Next book is Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us by Brian Klaas, Klaas. This book is 320 pages. It was written November 2021, so it's pretty current. This book is all about what creates corruption. Does power corrupt, or are the corrupt attracted to power? He talks about power hierarchy is a relatively recent human phenomenon that began with projectile weapons, that power systems were actually diffusely distributed before projectile weapons, but projectile weapons kind of even the playing field. After the power hierarchy is set up, we have like an evolutionary mismatch where our lizard brains may still believe that those with the most bravado, that are usually white men, how they're perceived, are still the most equipped to be leaders. So there are those that are corrupt or attracted to power, but Klaus also tells us that systems matter, and that's ultimately what the book is about. Rather than setting up a system that favors the corrupt and makes them corrupt, you can set up a system and recruit actually people that are not as corruptible into your power system. Very good book. I read this one recently. I highly recommend it. Next up is The Precipice: Neoliberalism, the Pandemic, and the Urgent Need for Radical Change. This is by this is a Noam Chomsky book. I've read a lot of Chomsky. This is a recent publication, last June 2021. And this is basically, honestly, this is just a polemic, like a tirade against neoliberalism and Trumpism. Very accurately done. The way what neoliberalism is, how it's come to power in the last 30, 40 years, and how Trumpism is like a fake populist movement where, a charlatan has been able to harness and exploit deep resentment toward elites and use that to gain political power. So I don't know if there's anything like particularly new here, but it's very succinctly done. It's very repetitive because it's a lot of like interviews over and over again. But I did this one recently. It's good. Read a lot of Chomsky. You could do a whole hour of Chomsky. The next book I talk about a lot. In fact, I think I featured it on my podcast. It's called The Divide: A Brief Guide to Global Inequality and Its Solutions by Jason Hickel. This book is incredible. I think everybody should read this book, written by an economic anthropologist. This book is about the International Monetary Fund. If I had to boil it down, it's about the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is basically polices the world's economy and subjugates other countries with debt, makes sure that they cannot use their actual resources to enrich their own people, but to keep in the hands of multinational corporations, and how the U.S. runs the International Monetary Fund. That's what this book is about. It's about a lot more. I highly recommend this book. Next up is Border and Rule: Global Migration, Capitalism, and the Rise of Racist Nationalism. This is by Harsha Walia, Walia. It's about 200 pages. It was written in March 2021, and I also featured this on my podcast maybe a few weeks ago. This is the most profound book I've ever read about immigration. I actually feel like I understand kind of how immigration works now after reading this. Basically, what it boils down to is that immigration is legal human trafficking. That's what the author believes, and immigration acts as illegal immigration is an allowed pop-off valve for the economy, and this is about privatizing. Basically a carceral state, privatizing, caging people and making money off of that. This is a profound book. It will make you extremely angry, as most of these books will. So that one's called Border and Rule: Global Migration, Capitalism, and the Rise of Racist Nationalism by Walia. Next we have Kill Switch: The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy. This is written by Adam Gentleson, Gentleson. This is 336 pages. It was written in January of 2021. This is all about the filibuster, the creation of the filibuster, how it came about, how it was never intended to be if you were to ask the founding fathers what they thought of the filibuster, they would say, "What is a filibuster?" They had no idea. It talks about the origins of it with John Calhoun, how it was used by Southern white supremacists to preserve white racial apartheid, and then its use today, and it's how it's evolved and how it's used today, and how it's very anti-democratic. I learned a lot from this book, Kill Switch by Adam Gentleson. Next book, which I talk about a lot on TikTok and this podcast, is Goliath: The 100-Year War Between Monopoly, Power, and Democracy by Matt Stoller, Stoller. It's 600 pages. It was written in October 2019. This is a very smart man. I get his newsletter every week, and I follow him on Twitter. He's extremely intelligent. This book is about monopoly power, how it came about in the 1920s and 30s, how it was dismantled, and how it's back, and how monopoly power is basically a competing form of government. You go through a lot of history here with Andrew Mellon, who played a big role in monopolization as Secretary of Treasury for 3 presidents back in, and he owned so many companies, aluminum companies, all that stuff. You learn a lot about Andrew Mellon in this book. This is, I would put this one very, very high on your list. I learned so much from this book. Again, this is called Goliath, The 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy by Matt Stoller. The next book is called Listen Liberal, or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People by Thomas Frank. 320 pages, written in March 2016. If you're liberal, or Democrat, whatever, you definitely need to read this book. It is a diatribe against the liberal establishment, and it is very, very well done. It's all about it's criticizing liberal technocracy, right? A bunch of like ivory tower liberal politicians that get together in a room and they figure out how to run society, and they completely miss the point that maybe people don't want to be run that way, and they completely forget about large swaths of people, and we have a huge backlash as a result of this. The liberal class is obsessed with pining for consensus. The liberal class actually flatters privilege, doesn't condemn it. It's like a virtue quest for and how the liberal elites basically do the same thing that conservative elites do, which is pandering to multinational corporations and money. Very, very smart book. I recommend that. It's Listen Liberal by Thomas Frank. Next book is Break 'em Up, Recovering Our Freedom from Big Ag, Big Tech, and Big Money by Zephyr Teachout. This woman is brilliant. This was written in May 2020. It's 320 pages. This is all about how monopolies are a competing form of government, like I mentioned before, and they are absolutely winning the right tool to the rule. It's a very important book to read right now, talking about the weakening of antitrust and completely ignoring antitrust starting in the 1980s. Chickenization, which is a corporation expanding its influence horizontally and vertically, acquiring businesses and acquiring how everything is distributed, just swallowing up entire industries. This is an extremely important book, and Zephyr Teachout is an amazing, very smart person. Next book is actually another Chomsky book. I think I just have 2 Chomsky books on this list. This is Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. If you haven't read Chomsky, this is a great book to start with. It's just 200 pages. It was written in 2017. And it's just a concise treatise about the root problems with American democracy. Profits over people. Maximizing profits. Talking about our plutocratic system, which is, a plutocracy is basically just rich, powerful people running us. And how it's all anti-capitalistic. It's actually anti-capitalistic, anti-competitive. And this is all, again, about neoliberalism. It's a short, brief book. If you haven't read Chomsky, just pick this up. Next book is Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. Ezra Klein is one of the founders of the news media Vox, which, is problematic. Reading a book by someone like that who owns media. I usually I'm not attracted to a book like that when I know that's the person who wrote it. But he's a smart guy. I don't adore him or anything. But this is a good, useful book. It's 336 pages. It was written in January 2020. He explains the polarization of American politics in a really accurate and concise way. Very easy to understand. Really breaks it down. It's concise and just talks about how politics has now just become like a stacking of identities. Your personal identities now line up with your political identity, which is like a rather kind of a newer phenomenon. Everything's about identity. Everything's about negative partisanship, which is more galvanizing than positive partisanship. People care about winning. Facts aren't really a powerful tool anymore, and our own cognition actually suffers when our political identities get involved. This is a good book. I do recommend it, particularly if these are kind of new concepts to you. Next up is The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism by Naomi Klein. She's a brilliant journalist who I've read several of her books. This book is 550 pages. It was written in 2007. This is a must-read. It's a scathing analysis of basically like Milton Friedman, the economist of neoliberalism school of thought, and it's all of its disastrous consequences. The basic point of this book is the shock doctrine is a philosophy that one must start back at zero in order to create a more ideal or pristine state, right? It's basically propaganda, and it's used as an excuse to go to a country, destroy that country, take its resources, and enrich, the invading country, which we've seen over and over again. The United States, for one, being a huge, perpetrator of that. So this is a very good book. This is like top of the list. Again, Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. Next book is This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, The Cyber Weapons Arm Race by Nicole Perlroth. This is written in February 2021. It's about 500 pages. This is an amazing book. This is all about cyber warfare and how absolutely terrifying it is. I'm not like a big tech person, and I don't understand a lot of that stuff. And this was written for someone like me. She does a really good job explaining to the layman the complete and like utter danger that ensnares our current geopolitical landscape, and like basically certain doom that lies in wait for us with cyber warfare. Goes into a lot of what Russia has done to Ukraine, not before the Ukraine war, but how they basically perpetrated a cyber warfare attack on Ukraine and shut down cities and their power, and just how vulnerable we are, and how the United States is complicit in creating like a black market of what are called 0-day vulnerabilities to actually hack computer systems. Anyway, this is again top of the list. I know I'm saying that about a lot of these books, but I really recommend this. Again, it's called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends" by Nicole Perlroth. Next book is "The Triumph of Injustice: How the Rich Dodge Taxes and How to Make Them Pay" by economist Emmanuel Saez, S-A-E-Z. This was written in 2019. It's about 200 pages. This is an absolutely must-read book. It is jaw-dropping about how the American and global tax system is designed for rich people to not pay taxes. You have to read this book. You must. The top 1% earns almost twice as much as the entire working class, which is 50 times larger than the top 1%. There are really only two types of taxes: labor taxes and capital taxes. And he basically argues that capital taxes are basically tax-free at this point, and we need to have aggressively tax capital. And the reason we need to tax capital is to limit the power of the wealth. It's not of the wealthy. It's not just about it's not about distributing wealth. It's about limiting the power of the wealthy. This is a must-read. The Triumph of Injustice by Saez. Next book is "The System: Who Rigged It and How We Fix It" by Robert Reich. He's a great commentator, journalist. He was the Secretary of Labor for Bill Clinton, which is not my endorsement for Bill Clinton. I'm not a fan of Bill Clinton, but Bob Reich is a great thinker, and he basically talks about who is in power in the United States, and how it's basically, again, we're a plutocracy. The Business Roundtable and conservative thinkers and think tanks have basically fooled Americans into believing that if we give them power to the corporate class, that the benefits would naturally fall to the labor class, which is trickle-down economics, which is an absolute and utter fabrication. And he talks about how wealth is power. Once power is given, that power has one ultimate aim: preservation of that power. Very accessible, easy to read book. It's 220 pages. It was written in March 2020. It's called "The System" by Bob Reich. R-E-I-C-H is how you spell his last name. Okay, so those are kind of books about power and politics. Now I want to go into books about economics. I am obsessed about learning about economics. So I don't have a background in economics. I wish I did. I kind of want to go back to school and get like at least a bachelor in economics. The reason I'm so obsessed with economics is it is economists throughout a lot of American history, these Puritans, that have convinced politicians and the public that there is one way of doing things, and it's all under the guise of just basically promoting the power of the wealthy. So I think economists are extremely dangerous people because it's a very slippery science, and they can just basically take something out of thin air and be like, hey, we should do this, and everybody agrees because it's just this like black magic. So I think understanding economists, their role, and economics is extremely important in understanding how world power works. So I have quite a good list here of books written by mostly economists, but about how the economics of power work. So here we go. So again, these books are in no particular order of how much I think you should read them. If I really think you should read them, I'll like really emphasize it if you want to prioritize. So the first book, economic book, is called "The Price of Inequality: How Today's Divided Society Endangers Our Future." This is by Joseph Stiglitz, who's a well-known economist. This book is kind of like the greatest hits of why there's wealth economy. He does a really good job of like outlining the major forces that shape our wealth disparities. Neoliberalism, obviously that's a very big trend in the books I read. A lot of books talk about neoliberalism. This talks about globalization, regressive capital taxes, the cause of the 2008 financial crisis, and state and corporate collusion. That kind of has this like deranged merry-go-round of poverty and suffering that goes on and on and on. You're going to see this theme a lot in these books that I mentioned. So this is a good first place to start. If you haven't read an economics book in a while, Again, these aren't like books about economics. They're books written by economists, which is the difference. So this is The Price of Inequality by Stiglitz. The next book is by one of my favorite writers, David Graeber, who you're probably familiar with. It's called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. He's an anthropologist who's brilliant. He's also a known anarchist, but don't let that faze you if you don't know what anarchism is. If you don't know what anarchism is, if you haven't looked into it, it's probably not what you think it is. I'm not saying I'm an anarchist, but anyway, he's an anarchist, ideologically. That's beside the point. This book, so this is 500 pages, published in 2011. It's an amazing book about the history of debt. And to sum it up, war justifies making money, which justifies more war. There's kind of this cycle. This guy goes from the beginning of debt, what debt is, and how it's the underpinning of our global economy. And he really exposes debt for what it is. It's a collusion of the state and the market to create a communism of the elite, where the rules of debt only apply to the impoverished, right? The rules of debt don't apply to the rich. And certainly don't apply to like the major world hegemonic powers like the United States, right? The deficit doesn't mean anything to the United States. It talks about the legend of bartering, that there's some sort of evolution of economies that become more refined, more equitable. None of that is true. He talks about how currency has existed long before we thought. Debt altogether is an incredibly nebulous concept. Who are we in debt to? God, our mothers? There's like this unhappy, ethos of debt, sin, like debt, sin, and this never-ending quest for redemption, which is like enmeshed with churches and by extension the state. Anyway, it's a very complex book, but I'm making it sound more complicated. It's very palatable. I highly recommend this book. And I also recommend his other book that I talk about a lot called Bullshit Jobs. But you could start with this, Debt, the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. Next up is Freedom from the Market, America's Fight to Liberate Itself from the Grip of the Invisible Hand by Mike Konczal. His last name is spelled Konczal. This was published in January 2021. It's about 250 pages. So, I mean, a lot of these books are quite similar. He's talking about like what actually is freedom. The markets, the free markets have actually become very like coercive, and that we need actually freedom from the markets. That free markets are actually kind of a myth. The idea that markets were once free and operated without government structure is like a complete libertarian fantasy. Those circumstances have never existed. The free market exists within a legal construct that is built by the state, and that's just a fact. The state has always controlled relationships between employers and employees. And to believe contrary to this is a fantasy. It's a libertarian fantasy. It does not exist. The U.S. certainly did not leave it to the market during World War II and New Deal era politics. And so that's what this book is about. It's really only shareholders who benefit from reduction in corporate taxes, which is another theme that goes through a lot of these books. Next up is Talking to My Daughter About the Economy, or How Capitalism Works and How It Fails by Yanis Varoufakis. His last name is spelled Varoufakis. He is one of my favorite economists. He's a Greek-Australian economist and politician. He's amazing, extremely intelligent man. This book is short. It's 200 pages, written in 2018. It kind of boils down to we have two options with what to do with our political economy. We either democratize it or you commoditize it. He talks about how surplus is the direct driver that transformed our civilization into a market culture where everything, including human labor, has been commoditized. Bankers are able to employ what he calls black magic, meaning they sell money for interest rates, creating artificial market bubbles that inevitably collapse. They drive bank runs and mass financial failure for the most, which is not a flaw, he argues. It's like a feature to have these bubble economies that are driven by too much solvency from banks. Corporatists would not exist without the protection of the state. And another thing that he makes very clear, public debt benefits the elite. If you believe otherwise, you've probably been manipulated by a politician. The state steps in and puts a Band-Aid over the bankers' black magic, propping up recycling of the market economy to just another roller coaster ride. Very good book, very easy to read. Next book is The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy by Stephanie Kelton. This book's very controversial, and modern monetary theory is very controversial. I'm not like someone who thinks MMT is like the holy grail, but I do think it's very interesting. I think every American should read this book and know what modern monetary theory actually is. This book is, 300 pages, written in June 2020, making big waves everywhere. Basically, modern monetary theory is that the fundamental concept is the government should not balance its books like a household finance. like household finances. The government is not a currency user, it is a currency generator. The government cannot run out of money. It's impossible, particularly the United States government. And the deficit is a political tool, not a financial catastrophe. Another thing I really learned from this book is she argues why taxes exist. They actually exist for 4 reasons. For one thing, the government does not need your taxes to spend. We all know that. And she says the taxes exist for 4 reasons. None of them have to do with wealth distribution. Number 1 is to minimize inflation, to take money out of circulation, create demand for the dollar, to even be like, hey, you have to have money because the government will take it. Encouraging or discouraging behavior with tax incentives, and then to limit the power of the wealthy. Great book. I would say this is a must-read. The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. Next book is called Griftopia: Bubble Machines, Vampire Squids, and a Long Con That Is Breaking America by Matt Taibbi. This guy's very controversial. He's kind of gone off the rails a little bit. I don't really follow him that much, but this is a very good book to read. I don't care what the author. People give me slack for talking about reading this guy's books, but it's like I don't really care. What the author's into now. This book was written in 2010. It's about 250 pages. It's like, this book is sound, okay? And it's also incredibly entertaining how it's written. Basically, he talks about how the American economy is run by a bunch of unaccountable criminals. And this guy did his research. He really thoroughly explains why the 2008 financial crisis occurred, and also why there's a big surge in oil prices around the same time. And it was because there was a commodities bubble. Anyway, I highly recommend this book. It's called Griftopia by Matt Taibbi, Taibbi. Very good book. I've read a couple of his books too. He's a good writer. He is. Next book is Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. This book was written in 2002. It's 200 pages. So I very much loathe Milton Friedman. I think he's one of the most destructive economists that's ever in recent memory. And this is a book he wrote, and I read it to understand why him and his acolytes and everybody who thinks like him, why they think this way. It's probably one of the most catastrophic books written in recent memory. Milton Friedman, he basically believes a fairy tale that of the free market solutions, the infallibility of the free markets. He insists on abolition of government social programs, licensure, public schools, taxation, all that stuff. He's a Puritan. And he was so convinced of his own theories that anything contrary to them is ludicrous for him to even consider. I consider him the father of neoliberalism, which is broad privatization, slashing social programs, weakening the labor class, complete deregulation of business. And everybody else believed this guy around the 70s and 80s. And he very influential of Ronald Reagan, very influential of many countries that follow this pattern. He basically is responsible for the Chilean coup by Pinochet and a crony dictatorship that was set up. Anyway, that's a topic for another time. I think Milton Friedman is a very misguided individual. But I recommend reading the book to understand where the guy's coming from and why he's writing this. Next book is Bad Samaritans: The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang. He's a Korean economist. This is a must read. You got to read this. Basically his whole point is that the very industries, the very countries that are like developing countries, for them to the methods that they use to try to uplift their own economies by protecting their infant industries that can't compete in the world markets. They use things that are like socialistic, right? They use like government subsidies, tariffs, and infrastructure investment provided by their own governments, okay? So, and the United States has a big problem with this because when actual countries go after their own sovereign goods to protect their own people, the United States gets involved and they topple whatever socialistic government that's trying to do that, so that their companies can continue to, multinational companies can continue to reap those benefits and bring them back to the United States. And this is all policed by the International Monetary Fund. There's a theme here in these books, right? The IMF is a big, big theme here. So that's what this book is about. The reason, so basically, the poor countries can't do deficit spending because the IMF won't allow it with the loans that they give, because they say it causes inflation and poverty. Yet at the exact same time, rich countries constantly employ these same exact deficit spendings and government subsidies at the same time, which gives them an unfair advantage on the global market. This is a very, very good book, very easy to read, very accessible, and you will learn a lot. It's called Bad Samaritans: The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism. It was published in 2007. It's about 300 pages. Next book is called Donut Economics: 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist by Kate Raworth. She's an economist This was written in 2017. It's about 400 pages. This is a good book. It's it's like the hopes and dreams of like a classic, like a liberal of what they would want the economy to be like. It's a really good book. I don't think it's realistic at all. I don't think anything in these things will ever happen. I would wish they would happen. Basically, we shouldn't be so focused on GDP and economic growth because that it's not an exponential thing. It's not a panacea for inequality. GDP and economic growth are not exponential, but actually live on a sinusoidal curve. And there's a point where a nation must not be obsessed with GDP growth because it will force unhealthy behavior like what we're seeing: immigrant scapegoating, financialization, hollowing out of the middle class, speculative bubbles, the privatization of public goods to create terrible revenue streams. So it's a good book. I think it's like, if you want to dream big, this is the book about what a modern economy should look like. This is that book. Okay, take a break. So I don't know if this is helpful at all. I don't know if you're enjoying this. Give me feedback because it's just snippets of books. But I'm going to now go into books about racial justice, particularly that have to do with the United States. It's a long list. Maybe I won't go over every book, but let's see. Stay with me. So I've read tons and tons of books on this topic, like a lot, that they all start kind of repeating themselves. So I'm really going to just give you the ones that I think are really, really good. One that is a lot, but really does a good job of it is called The Sum. It's a recent book. It's called The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGhee. It's written in February 2021, and it's about 500 pages. Basically, this woman really just, the main thrust of the book is that racial history, racial resentment, and political racecraft wielded by the power have like monolithic impact. All people of all colors are harmed by racist policies. And like this book is just for everybody to read. Who suffers from cutting social programs? It's white people and it's black people and it's brown people. It's all people when we cut programs that are race selective. Everybody suffers. Most white voters do not understand how political racecraft works. And the great irony is that white Americans have traditionally benefited from government social programs, from like the Homestead Act, the GI Bill, free college, Social Security, Medicare, HOLC, redlining. The vast intergenerational wealth that white people enjoy is because of government policy that directly benefited them. But the attitude of this woman, of this author, is just beautiful. It's very healing. It's very understanding. I highly recommend this book. It's called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. Next book is now become just, it's a must read. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. It was written in 2010. It's about 300 pages. Really, it's become more popular since the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd. It's really a scholarly and precise treatment of mass incarceration of black men. As I said, this is required reading. Alexander provides irrefutable evidence of how mass incarceration was deliberately instituted to subjugate black men under the guise of executing justice to criminals. Throughout this book, you'll discover many, many ways in which police have vast discriminatory practices in targeting black men and black neighborhoods. I could go on and on about this book. Maybe I will in another podcast. I'll go into more detail, but it's a must read. It's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. All right, next book is The Color of Law: A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America by Richard Rothstein. This is also required reading, in my opinion. It's written in 2017. It's about 360 pages. It's a concise, thoroughly researched, and competently argued approach to the institutional racism against black people in the housing market. This book is about redlining. If you've wondered what redlining is, or if you want to know more, this is the book to read. The federal government explicitly barred the Federal Housing Administration from granting mortgage insurances to banks, specifically to black people. It was federal law. The segregation in neighborhoods that we see now is de facto segregation that came from de jure segregation from this. He gives example after example of black families legally buying homes only to be cast out by literal white mobs while police watched back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And these racist policies have had multi-generational effects that last to this very day, which obstruct black people from generating wealth, achieving education, and having any semblance of upward social mobility. This is a must-read. It's called The Color of Law by Rothstein. Next book is White Rage: The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson. She's a fantastic author. This was written in 2016. It's about 250 pages. this is like an overly broad but compelling overview of the oppression and subjugation of Black Americans from the time of slavery, the Reconstruction period, up to today. So this is a very good book. And then I recommend her other two books. Briefly, the One Vote, what is it called? One Person, No Vote, and also her other book, The Second, which is about the Second Amendment. Fantastic. I recommend all three of those books. A must read is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, who is just James Baldwin. What a poet. Just a playwright, social critic, amazing guy from the 1950s and 60s. This book is just too beautiful to even talk about. It's a short book. This was written in, I forget, 1960s, 1963, I'm seeing. It's 100 pages. Just pick this up. Read James Baldwin. This book will change and move you forever. The next book is Hood Feminism, Notes from the Woman That a Movement Forgot. I've gone into detail this book on my podcast before, if you've listened. This was written in 2020. It's about 280 pages. It's basically about white feminist movement is kind of a movement of affluence and completely forgets about impoverished women that often are women of color. This book is real. It's raw. It's incredibly intelligently written. It goes over gun violence and tons of all of our double standards and white and black of white culture, which is anyway. I won't go into more detail because I did in a previous podcast, but definitely read this book. You got to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I listened to the audiobook of this, which is more recent, and it was Lawrence Fishburne did the narration and did a fantastic job. It's about 500 pages. It was originally published in 1965. You just got to know about Malcolm X. It's about his story. This book. It's obviously biased by his own storytelling because it's an autobiography, but it's honestly one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's the journey of a martyr who holds the mirror to America. Malcolm X was a deeply also flawed man with a lot of the ways he thought, particularly about women, and he was also quite anti-Semitic. But what a towering intellect! And this guy, Malcolm X. I don't need to lecture anybody about Malcolm X. You got to read this. The autobiography of Malcolm X is very good. The Color of Money: Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap by Mehrsa Baradaran. The way her last name is Baradaran. Incredible book. It was published in 2017. It's about 370 pages. It's a thoroughly researched and clear demonstration of the American history of a racial wealth gap. This book does two things. It's a methodical recounting of the attempts to create black wealth in America while demonstrating the racist structures in place that ensured its failure. This is all about post-Reconstruction era. Extremely good book. I really like this author. I follow her on Goodreads and Twitter. She's really cool. I like her a lot. She's a professor of law at UC Irvine. It's called The Color of Money. Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. She is a hero of civil rights movement. This book is only 150 pages, written in 2016. It's great. It's a piercing perspective from this legend of civil rights, and I learned a very important point from this book: the intersectionality of freedom movements across the world. Injustice is injustice, no matter where you're from, whether it's Palestinians or whether it's Black Lives Matter in Ferguson. She offers a very non-Western opinion about capitalism and social hierarchy. Good book, very good. There's plenty more we can talk about with Angela Davis. The last book on this topic I'll recommend is White Too Long: The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity by Robert P. Jones. Really, really great book. It's scholarly, timely, and it's like a loving repudiation of white American Christianity and the right of white Christian nationalism, which is a form of extreme offshoot of Christianity, right? We learn about right after Reconstruction era, Jim Crow quickly coming in and propagation of Confederate mentality and iconography, and he really goes into a lot here. I found this book to be unexpectedly touching, and kind of gave me hope looking forward for not only Black Americans but white Christians whose history continues to hold them back from living the very teachings that they espouse. Quite a pretty beautiful book, actually. White Too Long by Jones. This was written in 2020. It's about 300 pages. Okay, so I've really talked your ear off about a lot of books. I don't even know how many books that was, probably 100 or something. And that's all I'm going to do for nonfiction. So I want you to know I didn't have time. So these podcasts, I do it snippets, before or after work. I'm a dad. I'm an ICU doctor. I do these snippets, right, on my phone. The reason I'm saying this is I haven't looked through all these books. I don't know if I've not correctly, but have had the best representation of people of all color and all genders. Okay. So these are books that I found through my reading list that I thought would share with you. I'm sure it's a bad representation because there's bad representation. It's systemic everywhere, and it's probably coming out here. So I have not gone through and vetted to make sure I get the best representation. There are more books to read. These books represent only some people's worldview, and there's many, many other books from other worldviews, to read about. And these are the books that I've liked. These are not the only books that I've read. I have many books that I don't like that I've read that I could also talk about that are not of my worldview, that challenge my worldview. It's extremely, like, if the only books you read are the books I mentioned here, it's kind of an echo chamber. It's a big echo chamber, right? Covered a lot of topics, but it's still an echo chamber. You got to read books that challenge your worldview. And I even need to do better at that. I mean, I tend to like books that I'm interested in that, I'm like, oh, I want to know more about this. But I do read books that challenge my worldview often, and I need to do it even more. All right. So if you are not interested in my sci-fi and fantasy recommendations, you can hop off this podcast now. And thank you for getting it this far. I hope this has been useful for you. Let's get into sci-fi and fantasy. In quick succession, I'm going to give you 25 books that are on my masterpiece shelf. These are both sci-fi and fantasy books that I consider to be masterpieces that I absolutely loved and highly, highly recommend. I could spend a whole nother podcast talking about this, right? About sci-fi and fantasy books, because I got a lot of books to talk about. But again, this is not a ranked order, right? I'm just in no particular order. These are 25 of my absolute favorite sci-fi and fantasy books. One of them happens to be the most recent, very recent book, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Oh my gosh, what an incredible book. Absolutely stunning, about astrobiology, and it's just so touching. I loved it. The next book is it's an indie book. It's called Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. It's about, it's like 1,000 pages, fairly recently published. Such a beautiful fantasy book about a kid who's kind of like neurodivergent. Maybe he's on the spectrum. He has the special ability to tie knots for some reason, and it definitely has to do with this underworld that's going on. Really, really, really good storytelling. Highly recommend by a female fantasy writer. The next two books are some of the best science fiction I've ever read. The first one is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. It's an unbelievable sci-fi world, a global, intergalactic, hegemonic culture in the far future. There's like this religion, that has to do with there's I don't even know where to begin with this book. There's so many concepts. It's like a space opera. It's got a little bit of cyberpunk. It has a lot of like poetry. It's incredible. This guy really makes it work come all together. It was written in the 90s. The sequel to it is The Fall of Hyperion, which is even better. If you like classic sci-fi, this is up your alley. I do recommend that. The next, I'm just going to recommend a trilogy of fantasy books. It's the Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. These are such dumpster fire books in such a great way, meaning it will hurt your soul to read these books. It's a retelling of Mao. It's a fictional retelling, like a parallel grimdark book of the rise of Mao, and it's just wow. It's a young, new, talented writer. She's really amazing. I highly recommend that trilogy. The last one, The Burning God, is incredible. One of my favorite trilogies that's on this list is The Warlord Chronicles. It's an Arthurian saga by Bernard Cornwell. The first one's called The Winter King. Some of the most amazing fantasy I've ever read. It's very relevant to today. It's like this boiling pot of culture wars with Christianity and paganism and the idealism of Arthur. Unbelievable trilogy. I've read the whole thing, and I highly recommend it. Next book is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. She is a towering figure in fantasy and sci-fi. This book is about hope. It's about friendship. It is an absolutely beautiful book. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. The Left Hand of Darkness. Game of Thrones is incredible. The third one is on my list of masterpieces, A Storm of Swords. Just the convergence of plot lines is just incredible. And the writing, I don't need to talk about Game of Thrones. Everybody knows about it. But if you haven't read them, read them. And I read them after I watched the show, and I loved the show. Obviously, I had the same gripes about how it ended, just like everybody else does. But the show is incredible. The books are better, as always. Not always, but The books are better, but read them. Read up to at least number 3, The Storm of Swords. Wow, it's good. Next book is also an indie fantasy book, but it's called The Sword of Kaigen, Kaigen, by M.L. Wang. Another Asian high fantasy, incredible book. It's about a woman who has magic-wielding children that she doesn't understand. She's in this patriarchal tribe. Very good. It has the best duel I've ever read of. I highly, highly recommend that book. A trilogy I recommend by Joe Abercrombie, he's called The Lord of Grimdark. You got to read The Blade itself. Really amazing fantasy trilogy with a lot of spin-offs, and another series that just came out that's finished that I'm going to read as well. The next book I want to recommend is Blood Song by Anthony Ryan. This is just a really beautiful coming-of-age book about loyalty and morality, with a really great romance told over a classical fantasy setting with really incredible characterization. If you haven't read fantasy in a long time, pick this up, Blood Song. It's a series, but you only need to read the first one. You don't have to read the other ones if you don't want to. If you haven't read Ted Chiang, he wrote stories. What is it called? Stories of Your Life and Others. One of the short stories is in that book that the movie Arrival is based on. So if you enjoy the movie Arrival, you would probably enjoy Ted Chiang. And then the book I want to recommend is Exhalation, which is his most recent compilation of short stories. He is one of the best current modern sci-fi writers. Cryptonomicon by Neal Stephenson is all about hacking in World War II and hacking in the 1990s. It's an incredible book. You've never read anything like it. It's about 1,000 pages. It's long to get through. Neal Stephenson is one of my favorite sci-fi writers. If you haven't read him, you might want to start with Snowpunk, which is like one of the books that influenced the cyberpunk genre, and then move right into Cryptonomicon. I've read about 6 or 7 of his books, and he is one of my favorites, one of my absolute favorites. The next book I'll recommend is, it's a series. It's The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. This guy's definitely taken over the fantasy world quite a bit, with good reason. I've read all of this series of The Faithful and the Fallen, and I've started his next series as well. It's kind of a classic medieval fantasy tropes, but really well done. And then I'm going to recommend another series called The Legend of the First Empire by Michael Sullivan. The first one's called Age of Myth. He's a great fantasy writer. If you just like classic fantasy that's straightforward, but with really great characterization, really amazing female cast, and just fun, pick up that series. The first one is Age of Myth. And then the last thing I'll recommend is for fantasy veterans. If you haven't read it, and if you're considering it, it's Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is a 10-book series. Each book is like 1,200 pages. It's very dense. If you are not into fantasy, do not pick this series up until maybe you're more into it. I will tell you, if you know what I'm talking about, I just finished book 8. It's 10 books, and then with tons of spinoffs. It's worth it. I will tell you right now, as someone who finished book 8, it is worth it to get in this series. It's a flawed series, but it is worth it. Anyway, I don't know how helpful all that was, but thank you for joining along my book journey. I could have talked for 5 more hours about books. So I just want to leave you with this thought that knowledge. So power takes many different forms, right? There's like political power, there's social power, there's actual like functional power, there's military power, but there's also the power of knowledge. And in these kind of times that we're in that are very unstable, and there's a lot of we're having this reality crisis. The more knowledge you have, the more power. That is a form of power to advocate. If you know what's going on, you have power. That power may not it may not have the bravado of political power or military power or whatever, but it is powerful. You're playing the long game by reading and by increasing your knowledge. You're playing the long game. You know what's going. You don't. It's impossible to know what's going on all the time. But as you read, it's one more piece of the puzzle. One more piece of the puzzle. Reading. It will empower you. It is absolutely thrilling. And let's talk more about books. I don't know. Let me know what you think of suggestions. If you read one of these books, you want me to know about it. If you want me to do another podcast like this, I don't know if people like this. My email is ICU Dr. ECMO, ECMO@gmail.com. TikTok handle is @ICUDoctor. So just message me, let me know. Thank you for listening this far. If you got this far, I don't blame it if I'm literally talking to no one at this point. Thank you. Oh, and wait. I forgot to mention the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which is like my favorite fantasy series that's ever written. If you haven't read fantasy in a while, start back with Brandon Sanderson. Start with Mistborn, or just start with the Stormlight Archive. Anyway, I cannot believe I didn't mention Brandon Sanderson. I'm like a huge fanboy. Anyway, that's it. Bye.